Hello and welcome to the first part in my large series of videos on how to set up your QNAP NAS right the very first time. We're looking at the QNAP NAS series and QTS5, and in this series of videos we are going to cover everything from initialization, setup and storage to iSCSI targets, map network drives, photos, videos and music, surveillance, remote access and multi-tiered backups. We're going to cover everything before we allow you to connect any NAS to the internet. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to set it up for the first time, how to create user accounts, create your RAID, storage pools and volumes, how to map a network drive, create an area of shared folders and shared storage, and create all of your user accounts straight away off the bat. We are utilizing the 653D today, but if throughout the course of this video, I will make kind of highlighting bits where it may not be appropriate to you. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you've unboxed everything on your NAS. Make sure your NAS is on the table and you've got your storage media ready. Also, make sure if you've got this ready that you have got both the power cable and you're in proximity to your router or switch when we connect it later on. So in the case of this NAS, and again this will differ depending on which device you use, start to remove your trays. Now, you can operate a QNAP NAS with QTS5 with as little as one hard drive or SSD if you choose. You don't have to fully populate the device, and you can get away with even just a single drive. It is recommended you use multiple drives in order to make sure that you've got things like redundancy and performance benefits. So in order to install a hard drive, remove the tray that's inside, and in some cases the trays will be click and load trays like this, and in other cases you'll need to use a screwdriver. I'll show you both. So in this case we've got our tray, and you see these clips on the side? We need to remove them now. Remove the clips on either side of the tray. Take your hard drive, in this case a SATA Seagate iWall 4TB. Make sure that the SATA connection is faced out and place it in the tray label up. You'll know you've got it right because the holes on the side will be in alignment with the holes on the drive. The holes on the tray will be in alignment with the holes on the drive. Take the clips that you removed earlier and place them on either side of the drive. This will affix the drive into the tray and stop it from coming out. Then take the tray, taking care to make sure you place it the same way up that it's gone in, and slide it into the available cavity. Again, at this angle it's easy to get wrong, but just make sure you slide it in and you hear the click. That click means that the SATA connector has met with the SATA port on the rear back board there. But what if you were choosing to install SSDs? SSDs are going to be slightly different. Remove a tray that's inside. As you can see from the base of these trays, they have screws. Now SSDs can be installed by installing screws on the base of the tray, and screws will be included with your network attached storage accessory box. In some cases you'll be able to hold it with 3 screws, and in others just 2, but either way it will hold the drive in place. And again, then you've got an SSD in the same size tray. Do take care when installing an SSD, as sometimes the connection of the SATA on the drive and the rear of the panel may be millimeters of difference there, and that's not to do with the fault of QNAP but the bulkiness of some drives. But as long as you hear the of when you install it in on that click, you should be absolutely fine. Again, the amount of drives you put in and the types of drive you use are up to you. Just make sure they're all SATA and you'll be absolutely fine. If you have a front panel, reinstate the front panel, otherwise shut the trays and lock them, and then go ahead and grab your Ethernet cable like this. Connect the Ethernet cable to the rear of your device on the available network port or ports. In this case I've got 2 network ports to choose from, but I can select either one of them. Connect it to the rear of that port, make sure you hear the click, and then from there connect the other half to your router or switch. Now bear in mind with your router or switch that the next step in this installation, when we move over to the screen, will be conducted from a laptop. You're going to need either a laptop or a Mac or a mobile phone to continue the installation and the initialization of this device. So do make sure that both the NAS and that device are on the same network, and by that I mean that they are either physically connected via a cable to the same router or switch, or the NAS is connected via this cable to your router and the device you're using over Wi-Fi is connecting to that same router. It also helps if that router has level internet connection or the switch that you're connected to has the internet, as you will be required to download the latest version of the software. This does arrive with software by default, but I strongly recommend you get the latest version with all of the security and firmware updates regularly installed there. Next, get either the external PSU that this NAS arrives with, or just go ahead, if your NAS doesn't have an external PSU, and connect the power cable from your wall into the NAS. Make sure it's turned off at the wall before you connect it, either into your external PSU or directly into the rear of the NAS. Once you've connected that, go ahead and grab the other end and connect it into the rear of your NAS system. Once you've got it connected in, like so, you're ready to go. Turn it on at the wall, and from that moment, just go ahead and click the power button on the front of the NAS. I'm not going to do that here because we're very close to the mic. I'll do it right at the end there. But just before we continue, it's worth highlighting that regardless of the number of drives you install inside, a number of you who have set up QNAP NASes for the first time often get the idea of what the hard drives are all pulled together are actually doing. When you connect all of those drives inside, you can combine them into something called a RAID. This RAID that you put inside there, which is a configuration that can provide performance benefits as well as a safety net, also allows you to create one large storage area called a storage pool. Now that pool isn't what you, the user, are going to be interacting with. You will be creating a volume on top of that. That volume is where you'll actually interact with your data. And if you are a user that wants to have separate containers for your surveillance, for your media, for your backups, for friends, family and work, don't try to use individual drives for each of those purposes. You won't have any redundancy and there's no inherent benefits. Go ahead instead and put all or most of your drives into one giant storage pool in that RAID configuration, and from there create separate volumes for all those different tasks. That means everything will still be separate, but you will still have the redundancy and performance benefits of RAID in that larger storage pool. Now we're ready to go. Let's start the device up and make our way over to the laptop to continue the installation, and I'll direct you to the tools to download from QNAP's website. So let's power the device on and get things started. Let's hop over to the laptop. Right, so we've made our way onto my Windows PC where we're going to continue the installation of QTS 5 on our QNAP NAS. Now, it's recommended that you take advantage of a tool known as QFinder Pro. It's an application that's available for Windows, Mac and Linux systems, and it allows you to interact with the NAS not only for the first time but moving forward. It has a number of tools on board for not only finding and configuring the NAS but also later on for interacting with the NAS and setting up connections for the likes of Mac's Finder program, Windows Explorer and more. In order to find it, head over to QNAP's own website, and from here go to the support button and then select PC, Mac and Utilities. Clicking there will open up this tab where if you scroll down, the very first tool you'll see is QFinder Pro. I'm going to use a Windows system, so I'm going to go ahead and click download. But bear in mind, obviously if you're using a different operating system, there are different options for you. This tool, once you download it, can be installed in around 4 to 5 clicks, and once it's installed will appear as an available application on your Windows system or of course Mac or Ubuntu. Now during that installation it will also ask you to allow the app to have access to the local area network. Once that's offered, do click yes, as this tool will need to have access to the network that is shared both by your client machine that you're using for this installation and for the QNAP NAS that you're using today. Once you've got that installed and you run it for the first time, it looks like this. It will open up in this blue screen, which is available here on your desktop client machine. As you can see, I'm running 2 QNAP NASes here, as I've got a series of videos for the setup and first time installation of this software and more on these systems. Once you have this application set up, go ahead and click this refresh icon here. It will search the local area network for available QNAP NASes. As you can see, it's allowed the system to find them here. Now, do bear in mind that when you do set this up for the first time, that you need to make sure that your QNAP NAS is on the same network as the client machine you're using. By network, I mean that they're connected to the same switch, connected to the same router, or, in caveman speak, that they are both using the same internet connection in your home or office environment. This allows the two to communicate and therefore allow your desktop computer, like this, to configure the NAS for the first time. If you have a NAS on your network that hasn't been set up before, as you see here, once you scan, it will ask you if you'd like to set up and initialize the NAS for the first time. Go ahead and click yes, or if this window doesn't appear, go ahead and double click on the NAS, in my case the 653D. Here is its address on the network, something we'll talk about later on. If you double click here, the NAS will appear like so on your screen. Now, if you are utilizing a NAS that only arrives with QTS as an available operating system, this is definitely the screen you'll see. If you're using a QNAP NAS that features a Ryzen-based processor, an Intel Core-based processor, or Xeon or more powerful, you will be given the option of installing QUTS Hero. I have got a full installation of that, hopefully going live at the same time as this one, so you should have an installation guide for setting up that ZFS file system. But this video is to take advantage of QTS 5. That is the EXT4 version of their software, and this video will guide you through that. Go ahead and select Start Smart Installation. The system will then ask you to specify the firmware. Now, all QNAP NASes will arrive with firmware inside. As you can see, my current version is version 5.0.0. It's one of the latest versions out there. But is it the actual latest version? If we select Check for Update, it will check the internet for any new updated versions. As you can see, as I updated this NAS around about 1 day ago, it's the latest version of that software. But do check online to see if there is a newer version during your installation. Alternatively, you can select a version that you've downloaded in advance. In order to do that, head over to QNAP's website again, and when you saw that option in the support section for downloading those utilities, head up to the OS and firmware updates. Click there, then enter the details of the NAS you're installing, in my case a 6-bay, and it's a 653D, and from here it will invite you to install the QTS 5.0 software. Alternatively, you can go for older versions if you choose to downgrade the firmware. Although do bear in mind that means you are missing out on some new firmware updates that can affect security and privacy as well as stability. So it's always recommended to go for the latest firmware update, and you can go ahead and download that, and then from within the NAS installation, go ahead and upload it there and then select its location on the NAS and go from there. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and continue with the latest version of QTS 5, then click Next. From here, it will ask you now to name the NAS. Now, the NAS name is what it would appear on as the network. So you can call this whatever you like. It will also appear in that name here on the QTS QFinder Pro software, or once the NAS is being made visible to other devices on the local area network, such as NAS to NAS backups or more. So it's recommended to either give it a unique name or at least name the NAS itself. I'm going to leave this as a default, but you can afford to be creative. Next, you have to create a username. I'm going to create a default username of admin using capital A and capital 1. This is going to be the super user account. So either give it a particularly unique name or just call it admin and keep track. But it's always recommended to keep it a little unique. Next, in the password section, give the admin account a password. It's recommended that you use a password that has both uppercase and lowercase utilized characters, as well as special characters and numerical values. Again, it is completely up to you which one you use, and the system will check that they are matched. From there, click Next. Next, you have to set the time up on the system. Now, you can set this manually if you choose, as well as selecting your time zone, but it's recommended that you synchronize with pool.ntp.org. This ensures that the time on your NAS is completely accurate, and if you do play around with the NAS's location globally, this will also make sure that the time management on your NAS is correct, also with daylight saving times and summer change times and more. So it means that all the NAS's apps and services run to the most accurate standard. Then click Next. Now from here you will have to set up the NAS's IP. An IP is an identity on the network of the NAS. Now, by default, the system will set up DHCP, otherwise known as a dynamic IP. This means the IP, which is this number at the top here, which is kind of like the address on the street of your NAS. If the IP is the house number and the street is your network, it will ensure that the NAS can be a little bit more flexible about its identity. So for example, if the NAS is rebooted from time to time when you're doing a firmware update, or you disconnect the NAS or connect it via a new identity, it will ensure that the NAS's address can change, but the system can still run. Now, if you're going to run numerous backup routines to and from the NAS, as well as accessing the NAS remotely, it is strongly recommended that you use a static IP. This makes sure that the NAS's address on the network never changes and is fixed at that network. Now, that's useful for backups, for local connectivity directly to a NAS via the likes of 10 GBE or more. However, it's worth remembering that if you disconnect the NAS onto a new network or a new network switch, that new identity can sometimes be invalid, or the subnet mask or default gateway won't be the same as the connected device you're utilizing, such as a Windows PC or Mac. That means that it can lead to connection conflict down the line. So do bear in mind that as useful as a static IP address is, it only works if you have zero intention of changing the NAS's physical identity on the network and the switch it's connected to, and indeed the modem or router that it's connected to as well. For me, I do recommend that during first time installation you use a dynamic IP. Then set up all of your local area connected devices, connecting your backups and more. And once that's done, then go into the network settings on the QNAP software and set it as a static IP. That will allow you to have fixed identities on the network, but during the installation and setup of the QNAP NAS, when the system may be rebooting, when the system may be doing a lot of changes, that you won't end up having a fixed IP, which can be problematic. So once again, I recommend a dynamic IP during initialization and setup, and then as you set up all of your backup routines, once they're all done, then fixing that IP as static, keeping it exactly the same as the identity it has so far. From here, click Next. It will then ask you to summarize the choices you've made so far, which are all listed on screen. After this, you'll click Apply, and the system will get ready to set up your initialization as well as begin the initialization of hard drives, something we'll touch on in a moment. But click Apply, and now it will warn you that the drives that you're about to utilize, or the hard drives or SSDs inside the NAS, are about to be formatted. Now bear in mind that when you're doing this, if you are using drives that have come out of an old Synology, an Acer store, a TerraMaster, a WD, or any other enclosure system, the data on those drives is going to be completely formatted and gone. If you're moving drives over from another QNAP NAS that is also a QTS 5.0 or even older NAS, that data will be migrated over, and the system will tell you before this window that migration is possible. If it hasn't put that message on screen, the data will be wiped. The same goes for if you're running a ZFS system using QUTS Hero, that will be initialized. Ultimately, just make sure that you've got a backup of the data on those drives if there is data before continuing this installation, otherwise the data will be lost. For now though, go ahead and click Initialize if this is the first setup on these drives. From this point, the system is now going to follow up on the steps you've made thus far. This can take as little as 2 to 3 minutes or as much as 10 to 15 minutes based on the architecture of the NAS and your internet connection. I'm going to fast forward past this step and take you through the following steps after the initialization has completed. Let's fast forward. And there you go. The software has been set up and the changes and choices you've made during the initialization have now been implemented. The next thing to do is select Go to NAS Management to continue the setup of QTS 5 on your QNAP NAS. Go ahead and enter the your user information that you created earlier for this account. I'm going to select Remember Me here. Let's zoom in a little bit, because I'm going to be doing lots of different things on this NAS and I don't want the system to time out. However, I do recommend that you don't tick Remember Me, as it will allow you to make sure that if you step away from the NAS for a few minutes, that the system will automatically log itself out, thereby keeping it a lot more secure. Also, you can set up a connection via HTTPS onto the NAS to allow encrypted transmission with everything you do. Again, I recommend that you utilize this on the NAS. However, I'm not going to be enabling it for this video, as I've got lots of services to show you, and enabling a secure connection can sometimes slow things down the tiniest pinch as data is being encrypted. But I do recommend you utilize it, even though I'm not going to, just to show you guys all of the steps in the most cohesive and quick way possible. From here, click Login, and it will log you into the user interface, or the GUI, of QTS 5 on the QNAP NAS via your web browser. From here, it will talk to you about data and privacy and how they do try to keep things as secure as possible on the system, and recommend that you keep things as secure on your side as they are on theirs. From here, it will ask you about the data privacy notice, and that sometimes usage information, not your actual data, will sometimes be recorded by the system in order to provide a better service and keep things as secure as possible based on the way people use their systems. Now, during the first time installation of this, a number of things are going to pop up on screen. It will let you know what things are, such as the start menu at the top, what individual configuration options are on apps, and how to download new apps, and how to configure your account for the first time, something I'll show you in a moment. But then a few pop-ups will appear on screen, which I'll talk you through right now. The first pop-up about welcoming you to the Storage and Snapshot Manager is what I'm going to guide you through when setting up your storage pool and volumes on the QNAP NAS for the first time. It is quite straightforward and will guide you through every step of the way, from everything to snapshots to hybrid mount in some cases. I'm going to skip this for now, but I do recommend you look through that to get a good understanding about what you do with your system. But also, once you click X, you'll go away, and then it will open up the Storage and Snapshot Manager as well as the System Data Agreement. As mentioned earlier, the QNAP NAS does ask if it's okay to record usage information, not your actual data, but how the system is used, so they can improve services. It's up to you whether you want to say yes or no, and it is by no means compulsory. As you can see, here is our desktop with the option to control our NAS, as well as go through numerous options for the first time setup, and there's guidance information on the bottom right for setting up the NAS for the first time in a customized and secure fashion. So the first thing we're going to need to do is head into the Storage and Snapshots area. Now, as we haven't created any kind of storage pool or volume yet, this area is blank. So either select New Storage Pool up here, or select the button in the middle. From here, it will ask you to start creating the storage pool with the storage media we have inside the NAS. In the case of this NAS, as you see, we have got Q tier not enabled right now. If you are using a mix of hard drives and SSDs, you can utilize Q tier to have them all combined into one giant available storage area, but with as data is being written to the NAS, data that is more frequently accessed or more important based on your usage will then be moved onto the SSD tier automatically. This is a great way to have one single, easy to manage storage area, but with different areas therein for different priorities of storage. As I'm not going to be utilizing mixed storage today, I'm not going to be enabling that feature. Next, we need to select the drives that we're going to use in our RAID configuration. Even though I've got 4 drives available, I'm going to be looking at a RAID 5. because I'm going to utilize this other drive later on as a hot spare in a future video. Now, I mentioned I'm going to be utilizing a RAID 5. Indeed, there are lots of different RAID configurations out there. If we bring it and zoom the camera in a little bit here, we can have a little look at the different ones and go through them. Single is when there's a single drive in a RAID configuration. That is, a single drive in your NAS doing its job. You have no inherent performance benefits and no safety net of a single drive in case the drive fails. JBOD, or just a bunch of drives, is when you have multiple drives all working independently. Again, you don't get the performance benefits and you don't get any kind of redundancy, ergo, a safety net in case a drive fails. Next, you have a RAID 0. A RAID 0 is when all the drives are combined together into one giant storage area. This can provide great performance benefits in terms of read and write. However, when it comes to redundancy or a safety net, if one drive dies, all your data is gone. A RAID 1 is when you have two disks. These two disks are read and written to simultaneously at all times and are truly synchronized. It can give a little performance boost, but it also allows one disk of redundancy. In other words, if one disk dies, all your data is safe on the other drive. Of course, RAID 1 can only be utilized with two disks. It's also worth highlighting that you will lose 50% of your overall capacity because although you're using two hard drives, they are mirrors of one another's data. A RAID 5, it allows you to have multiple drives, such as I'm using today, and it will provide a small performance boost, but will also have a slightly negative performance compared with RAID 1 because the system needs to calculate something called parity. Parity is when you have a blueprint being created with every write of data where data is written onto one disk, and then as you go through, the last disk has a little blueprint of all the data on the other disks. Then with the next wave of data, the data writes across, but this time the blueprint is done on a different disk, and that moves every time. That allows you to have one drive of data failure protection. But of course the system has to work a little harder to calculate that parity in real time and can sometimes, with less powerful NASes, result in a dip in performance. Then you have RAID 6. RAID 6 is nearly identical to RAID 5, but this time you need more disks and it gives you two disks of RAID failure protection. Do bear in mind again, much like RAID 5 where you lose one drive's worth of storage, you lose two drives of storage in a RAID 6. Also in a RAID 6, the CPU on the NAS will have to work extra hard, and therefore the performance of RAID 6 is slightly less than RAID 5 in less powerful NASes. The other RAID configurations are cluster RAIDs, which combine RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5 or RAID 6 to form RAID 10, RAID 50 and RAID 60. This means that often these are drives that are grouped together in bunches and then RAIDed as pools against one another. I'm going to be utilizing RAID 5 today because it's the easiest to go for in this kind of configuration for today's video. But again, this drive here I'm going to utilize as a hot spare and as a replacement disk in a later video. Now, moving forward, actually, before we do that, we can go and create a hot spare disk as disk 4. And there you can go. We can create that hot spare right now if you choose to. Carrying on. Next, you can take advantage of SSD over provisioning if you are using SSDs, if I am. This allows an area of space on the SSDs to be used as a kind of scratch area, an area of caching that can overall benefit the system when in use. I'm going to leave it on, so therefore it will improve system performance, but once again you will lose an area of capacity. Then you've got alert threshold. This allows you to be notified when the system is running out of space. I'm going to disable it here because I'm going to be doing a lot of intensive stuff with this NAS where I'll be filling the NAS several times, and therefore this is just going to be annoying for me, but I do recommend you use it in your own individual NAS use. Next, enabling guaranteed snapshot space is when the NAS will put aside an area of the storage pool that is reserved for snapshots. Snapshots are images, kind of like blueprints, that are taken of your overall storage area, and these are taken periodically based on a schedule you choose. This can be weekly, monthly, quarterly. However, that each snapshot needs to be maintained and kept. And then if you want to revert your system to an older snapshot, you can do it here and in the snapshot manager here on the tool. So I'm going to enable that area of snapshot space. Carrying on. And there you go. The configuration we've chose to utilize just needs us to sign off and create it. As you see, the data will be deleted on all disks, or we can go ahead and continue. The creation of a storage pool takes a little bit of time. The actual setup is quite quick, but the synchronization and the background can take upwards of a day, depending on the complexity of the RAID, the power of your NAS, and the available storage. Next, we're going to create a storage volume. We're just going to fast forward to the initialization of the storage pool. So as you can see, the storage pool in the background there is now synchronizing. What we can do is head into the RAID group. You can see that diagram of our NAS there in front of us. Go into the RAID group, and as you can see, the RAID 5 with those 3 disks and the 1 hot spare is now visible on screen, and it's synchronizing. Now, synchronization, as mentioned, will take a little period of time, again, depending on the drives you're utilizing, the power of your NAS. However, that doesn't prevent us proceeding with creating a volume. Now, for those that aren't aware, a volume is different to a storage pool. The drives, when they're combined together, create storage pools. On top of that storage pool, we place individual containers. These are known as volumes. Each one of these containers can either be the full size of the available space, or you can create multiple of these volumes. Maybe one for your home media, one for backups, one for surveillance, and more. And it allows you to create little compartments of data above and beyond what you would normally see from the likes of files and folders. It also allows you to create a lot more structured access to different areas of storage, and I'll show you that in a little while when we go through creation of users and groups. But for now, the next thing we want to do is go back into the storage and snapshots area, and at the top head over to the create icon and head down to the new volume. Now, in the new volume, this will allow us to create our volumes. By default, it will create a thick volume, and there are different kinds of volumes available. As you can see here on screen, different volumes provide different inherent benefits and in some cases negatives. Some of them allow you to change storage space on the fly when you're adding drives later in the system's life, and also allow things like snapshots and that Q tier. As with thin volumes, which again allow you to create that same on-demand flexibility, and in some cases can be better than thick volumes, although the majority of users will always stick with thick. Finally, a static volume, one that cannot be changed in its storage value later on, and on the other hand, it also doesn't allow snapshots or Q tier. It is arguably the most basic storage area. However, in terms of random file access, and that is when data is being pulled not in large chunks known as sequential, but randomly in different areas of the disk, performance will be considerably higher. I'm going to go for a thick volume because we may experiment with adding storage in a future video. Next, we need to select the area of storage pool that we've created. Remember, the storage pool is that area of multiple drives that have been combined together. If we have spare drives in the system, we can create a new one here and repeat the previous steps we'd already performed. Then click Next. Next up, we have to decide how much storage we're going to use on this volume. As mentioned, you can create multiple volumes if you choose. Now, you can either utilize a default area where the system will choose a certain percentage of space from here and then change the amount of storage being utilized in that volume as you need. Alternatively, you can just use up the entire available capacity on the storage pool and create one giant storage volume. In my case, I'm going to utilize 400 gig of this storage area, and I'm going to leave that remaining storage area of 155 gigabytes for another purpose in a later video. Now, if we go down to the bottom, you can change file formats, and this will create different block sizes and file transitions on the system. Again, depending on the amount of data and the types of data you use, this will be applicable. So for example, if you're going to be utilizing large databases of small amounts of data, it may be advised to change things over to 4K. But ultimately, as you select these volumes at the top, the QNAP will recommend a better choice of bytes per node here at the bottom. So it's recommended to leave that as default unless you know what you're doing. Alert threshold is where you will be notified if the system is starting to run out of space in that storage volume, not just the storage pool from earlier, but on the volume level. You can also encrypt the entire storage volume, which if the system is being accessed erroneously, or someone gets hold of the drives in the NAS, or they don't have the encryption key, they won't be able to access your data. But do bear in mind that encrypted data will always perform a little slower than non-encrypted data, unless you're utilizing a powerful system such as a Xeon or an Intel Core i5 7i9 or higher. I'm going to disable that because this is an SMB system we're running, and although we could use encryption later on with some of our performance tests, it may not present itself as much and as higher performing as we'd like for later videos. As you can see, as we've already created our area of snapshots, the system will ask us if we want to already create our snapshot retention schedule. I'm going to leave that enabled, but I'm also going to go into the snapshot, awful pronunciation there, area later on in a future video where we're going to talk about iSCSI LUNs, snapshots and more advanced storage techniques. If we click next, we can review everything we've done so far, creating our storage of area known as the volume, and click finish. And now the system is going to create our volume. When it's creating the volume, it doesn't just create a container of space. It will also generally create a small folder structure that lives for us to access here on the File Station Manager, something we're going to return to in just a moment as it initializes and creates the default areas of our volume, as you see there, as folders are being created. If we go back into the File Station area, it should start to allow us to utilize and see the contents of our storage volume shortly. Let's leave this system a small while, just a few minutes, while it creates our volumes, whereupon we'll go through shared folders as well as user creation. So now we've created our storage pool and our storage volume. What we need to do now is interact with this storage in the most optimal ways. Now before I start, I should highlight there will be a more advanced version of this video coming soon, where I'll talk about iSCSI LUNs, talking about snapshots, and effectively talking about far more integral and more business-led ways to interact with your storage. I'm going to be going through some of the more basic elements now, but do stay tuned for that video as soon as it's live, hopefully within the next week. But for now, the next thing we need to do is create a shared folder. Shared folders are the easiest way to interact with the NAS remotely, be it via the internet or via the network on other client devices. Although do bear in mind that some software on your client device, such as video editors using Adobe and more, may find that mapped network drives that use shared folder architecture aren't quite as effective, and therefore you guys, I should recommend an iSCSI target and an iSCSI LUN coming in that advanced video. But for now, let's go ahead and create that shared folder. Click the folder icon here in File Station. Scroll down and select Shared Folder. In here, we need to create our shared folder name. I'm going to call this 653D Share. Inside here, we can give it a comment or a name, but ultimately we can carry on, select where on the NAS in those volumes we created earlier that it's going to live. Then we can go ahead and say where we want it to live. We can have an automatic path created where it goes into the default directory, or we can make sure that this shared folder lives within a preset area of the NAS in a preset folder. But for now, I'm going to leave it in the default structure, something that will become a little clearer later on. From then, we can select how people have access and who have access, as well as applications and more, and I will be talking shortly about users and groups. Folder encryption can be enabled to allow you to encrypt this folder and therefore create an encryption key. Although this may lower performance a tiny bit, it will increase security. Business users and particularly enterprise users may wish to take advantage of that encryption. Next, you can say if guest users have access, whether you want there to have a network recycle bin, do you want SMB encryption, which is going to be network-based file transmission, and other more enterprise options that we'll talk about in a later video. And of course, if you're a Mac user looking to utilize your QNAP NAS and QTS5 for backing up via Apple Time Machine, select this option here and it will create a preset folder in this shared folder for your Mac to pick up on the network and start creating time-managed Apple Time Machine backups. I click Create. It will then create this shared folder. This shared folder, unless you change the permissions later, will also be accessible via other applications on the QNAP NAS. As you add more multimedia applications, file management applications and more, they will have access to this folder unless you restrict them later on, utilizing either content management systems in Multimedia Console and the file options in the control panel. Let's go ahead and create our shared folder. This should be done very quickly, and as you can see, we've now got our shared folder right here. Now, with this shared folder, we can go ahead and map this to our local machine. A lot of users won't want to interact with the NAS via this web browser, and they would rather use proprietary platforms and tools such as, for Windows users, using File Explorer, or if you're a Mac user, Finder. So in order to see the NAS on your own proprietary software, as you see here, what you need to do is map this network drive. Once again, there are advanced ways to do this using iSCSI targets and LUNs, but we'll cover that in a more featured video later. The first thing we need to do is head back into the QFinder application from earlier. Find your NAS there on the network, double check that it's on the same internet address and IP as what you're utilizing in the web browser, because if you have a dynamic IP and the system has restarted, this may have changed and therefore you'll need to refresh. Right click, go down to Network Drives. Network Drives will then check the network environment, and if you do have different file protocol, it will be listed here. Click OK, and you'll be required to enter the login credentials you created earlier when accessing this shared drive. Remember the account details and then click OK. This will list all of the files that you've got in the NAS. So as you can see here, there's the shared folder that we created and the public shared folder there. And they are both now visible here on my desktop computer. Now what we're going to do real quickly is go into the pictures folder of my PC. We're going to grab a pile of files here. We are going to drag and drop them here onto the web browser, as you can see here. It will then upload these files and also say to you how and when you want those files to behave when they're being uploaded, if a pre-existing version exists, whether you want it to overwrite or not. And as these files are uploaded very, very quickly, they will appear in that folder. As you see, the 653D shared folder. All of those files are there. We can even view them here on the web browser. So we can double click them and it will open them up here, as you can see from one of our news videos. Again, there are dedicated multimedia applications for photos, video and more in the App Center. So if you want to open these in a far more tailored fashion in the web browser, you can use those, and we will cover these all in a video coming very, very soon. Now, if we go back into the list of files and folders that we see here, we've still not got that mapped drive added. If we go back into that list that we had earlier of our shared folders, as we see, we can right click and select Map Network Drive. We give the drive a letter. In this case, I'm going to give it the letter N. Then click Finish. And now, as you can see, the 653D shared folder is now visible on my Windows Explorer and File Manager here on my Windows PC. Indeed, if we go into it, we can scroll down and we can go ahead, open them up, and we can see these files on our native File Explorer just like we'd want to see them. And again, all of the files are accessible locally rather than accessing them here via the web browser. Any files you upload into that mapped drive will immediately be updated and visible here on the desktop browser. You can even share the files directly from in the web browser here. So such as this one here, we can right click, we can select share, and then we can share via email if we choose, or it will generate a link and we can directly email to users here. We can go ahead with social media networks to share the file, and there's several supported. We can create a link directly to the file on its own, as well as enabling SSL encrypted transmission, have the file have its own expiry date, and even add a password if we choose to, or share with another NAS user. Now, NAS users are an interesting feature of most network-attached storage systems. You can allow hundreds, if not thousands of users to interact with the NAS, and every user's accessibility and eligibility for files and applications can be changed on the fly very quickly. So if we go into the control panel here, we can go into the user option right here and create our brand new user. We can upload an existing CSV if we choose, or create multiple users that I'll show you in a moment. But for now, let's create a user. This user can have a photo uploaded if they choose. We can give them a name, in this case Alan, and give them up their own individual password. We have to verify that password and give them a number and an email address if we choose, so they can get notifications with regards to the system based on the eligibility of the apps and services they've got access to. Then we can go ahead and assign that user to a group, something I'll show you in a moment. You can give them access to individual shared folders. So for example, we can give them read-only, so that's non-editing access to the 653D folder, but we can restrict their access to the public folder or give them full read-write access. For now, let's give this user access to both shared folders. Scrolling down, we can say which applications this user can access on the NAS system. So for example, we can give them full file management access, but restrict their access to some of the more important and integral applications there in the background. When you're ready, click Create. Then you've created your new user, and you can edit their password, change their account profile, edit which group they're in, their permissions, and their eligibility to different services on the platform. Now, once again, if you're a business user, you can create multiple users immediately. So go ahead and click that multiple user creation, click Next, give them a prefix. So if you're working in an office, you may want to give one group of team members, let's call them the sales team, we'll give them sales team. We'll give them the prerequisite number of users, and again, we want the user to start at the number 1. We'll say that there's going to be 9 users, and we'll give them a password. We've created our password there, we click Next, and now it's going to generate all of our sales team members. And there you go, there is our 9 team members immediately created. The other people are on the other page, as you can see here at the bottom. But again, as mentioned, we can also create groups. Groups, once again, allow you to change the privileges and access and have tailored groups of users for different access. So if you have a sales team that need access to accounts, but a warehouse team that need access to inventory, this can be quite useful. We can create a brand new group like so. Let's call this group Sales. This group, we can then click Edit and make sure that all of our sales team members are in the sales team group. Again, we can click some or all of them if we choose. Let's go for these 4 people. Then from there, give them access, but read-only access to these accounts. They're not able to edit anything, but they can view everything. Then click Create. And there you go, we've now created a sales team with those 4 members, as well as the ability to access shared folder permissions and different levels of access to applications and services. And again, all of that is controlled within this system. It's very straightforward and very easy to do. Each user will be able to access their own version of what you're seeing here, the QUTS graphical user interface, and the number of applications and files and services that you give them access to will be displayed on screen, and it will remove services that they don't have access to. You can either as the user or remotely as an admin go into the options panel, and then from here edit a lot of their values, such as changing their login screen, enabling an SSH access key to the back end, change their wallpaper, enable two-step verification with their mobile phone and authenticator applications, as well as changing the rules on their password, access, and more. And that's really it. Today we've gone through the hard drive installation, the software installation, the RAID building, volume building, user and group creation and control, sharing files, creating a shared folder, and mapping network drives. And that's pretty much it for your introduction for now on QTS 5 and QNAP NAS. In our next series part, we're going to be looking at backup options, synchronization, and looking at how to back up the content of your NAS to USB drives, cloud providers, NAS to NAS backups, and supporting SaaS or software as a service, and more. We'll be looking at lots of different tools in that part of the series, as well as creating a new video with more advanced storage. Once again, you can create a remote access to your QNAP NAS very easily using the My QNAP Cloud Access, but I recommend that you set up your system perfectly first, going through this series of videos where we will be looking at multimedia, looking at virtual machines, surveillance, snapshots, and more. So do stay tuned for that, and of course making sure that your NAS is secure as possible before opening it up to the internet and letting your users, your family, your team members and more access the NAS. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I know this has been a long video, but this is a big topic and I want to make sure I cover everything as much as I can. Do stay tuned for the next part and click like if you've enjoyed the video, as it helps me understand what I'm doing right and makes each part better than the last. And of course, click the notification bell and subscribe to be notified about further updates to this series and other QNAP NAS videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.